Okay, listener, let's unpack this. Imagine a small boat, middle of the Mediterranean, crew thinks they're just delivering aid. Simple mission, right?
Huh.
Then, bam, military vessels show up.
Yeah.
That single image, it just throws this huge spotlight on, well, the complexity, the conflicting stories, the danger around getting aid into Gaza now.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how that one thing immediately makes you want to dig deeper into the whole situation. You shared sources,
Yeah.
including a YouTube transcript, looking at two very recent, very dramatic events.
Right.
They're not just headlines, they're almost case studies, you could say, in the challenges here.
Exactly. So our mission today, digging into these sources you sent, is to look at these specific things that boat, the Mastaline, and also, tragically, these shootings at aid points on the ground. Try and understand the radically different ways people are seeing this, what it tells us.
They're stark illustrations, these events. And if you connect them to the bigger picture, you see the deep-seated issues, the history, and how the exact same thing can look totally different depending on who you ask.
So let's start with that boat you mentioned, the Mastaline. The sources talk about it, part of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, the FFC. This wasn't a huge container ship or anything, was it? Sounds quite different from, previous flotillas we've heard about.
That's right. It's described as a yacht. And the aid on board, relatively small amounts, rice, infant milk powder, things like that.
Right.
The FFC's stated aim, according to the sources, wasn't just about the quantity. It was clearly symbolic.
Ah, okay.
A direct challenge to the naval blockade, trying to get international eyes on the humanitarian situation.
And the sources mention a pretty well-known activist was supposedly on board. That definitely ramps up the symbolism.
They do.
Hmm.
Greta Thunberg was reported as one of the 12 activists from Sweden, Spain, Germany, other places. The FFC put out images, messages, claiming Israeli forces intercepted them with their hands up, that they were being held captive.
Okay, so that's the FFC narrative. Humanitarian mission, international human rights defenders, unarmed civilians, trying to break what they see as an illegal blockade in international waters, carrying needed aid. That's one version. What do the sources say about Israel's take on this, their perspective?
Well, Israel's response, as reported, was pretty clear-cut, communicated directly. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs said their Navy warned the boat because it was heading towards a prohibited maritime zone.
A zone they enforce.
Yeah, since 2007. It's key to their security strategy, they say.
And the reason for that zone, why maintain it?
Primarily, their stated reason is security, preventing weapon smuggling to Hamas in Gaza. The sources quote the Israeli Defense Minister, Gallant, talking about this Mastaline operation in very strong terms.
Strong how?
He called it a hate flotilla, explicitly told the IDF, the Israeli military, to stop it reaching Gaza's coast, using necessary measures. He stressed the blockade is vital for Israel's security in the ongoing conflict.
Hate flotilla. Wow, that's miles away from human rights defenders and humanitarian mission. Really underlines the totally different interpretations, doesn't it? FFC says unarmed civilians, international waters. Israel says security threat, propaganda.
Exactly. And the FFC, they didn't just accept that framing. The sources show they pushed back hard. They argue the blockade itself is illegal under international law.
Right.
They saw Gallant's words, necessary measures, as a direct threat of violence against civilians, illegitimate in their view. An FSC spokesperson, Ghassan Abul Fattouh, is quoted saying they wouldn't be intimidated, reiterating, civilian boat, unarmed, carrying aid, human rights defenders. Israel has no legal right to stop them.
This clash, humanitarian need versus security claims, and the completely different language, it feels familiar somehow. Did the sources connect this to past events, the history here?
Oh, absolutely. You can't really discuss this without thinking back to the Mafia Marmara incident in 2010.
Ah, yes. That was tragic.
10 people died during that interception. Another flotilla challenging the blockade.
Yeah.
It left deep scars. And that history likely informs both the FFC's determination now and Israel's tactics and rhetoric when dealing with these situations at sea. It's all layered.
Okay, so that gives us a glimpse into the challenges of getting aid to the coast. But the sources also detail these deeply disturbing events happening on land for people trying to get aid that's already inside Gaza, even if it's trickling in. Let's pivot to those shootings at aid distribution points.
Yeah, and this brings up a critical point about what happens after aid gets in. The sources note, while Israel has recently let more trucks in, overall access is still described as limited. There's been a long ground blockade, remember? And the way aid is distributed is also controversial, often through specific points, sometimes involving groups reportedly backed by the U.S. and Israel in areas under Israeli control.
And even with some aid arriving, the sources describe a desperate situation. They quote the UN human rights chief, Volker Turk,
Yes, that quote.
saying Palestinians face this awful choice: starve or risk being killed just trying to get minimal food.
It's incredibly powerful. It really captures the desperation that's the backdrop for these shootings. The sources detail several incidents. One specifically mentioned 13 deaths, 150 injuries east of Rafah, another near the Wadi Gaza bridge.
And these weren't presented as like one-off accidents.
No, tragically. The sources describe them as part of a pattern. It's noted over 130 people reportedly killed, 700 injured recently, just waiting for aid. And crucially, these are identified as civilians, not fighters. Civilians.
How are the different sides explaining these shootings? What are the accounts?
The Palestinian government's media office, their statements documented in the sources, are very strong condemnations. They've called these 8 points slaughterhouses, alleging Israeli forces deliberately lure civilians there, then shoot them, calling it a war crime against humanity.
That's an extremely serious accusation.
It is. And they're demanding an independent international investigation. They also want the distribution method used by this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, suspended. They criticize it for involving Israeli military elements, not experienced international aid groups.
Okay, so that's one account. Deliberate targeting. What explanation do the sources offer from the Israeli military side?
Their account is quite different. The IDF claims their soldiers fired because people were pushing, creating a dangerous situation for the troops providing security there. They also argue the area around these aid points is considered an active combat zone at night.
An active combat zone at night, but aid distribution happens in the morning. That seems like a significant disconnect in how the space is being described.
It certainly does highlight that disconnect, and the sources include accounts from survivors which directly contradict the Israeli military's story.
What did they say?
Survivors reportedly said the shooting happened after sunrise, and they described the aid points not as safe places, but as a trap. It just shows the deep mistrust, the fundamentally different ways these terrible events are being seen and described on the ground.
So when you look at both things, the Masteline at sea, these awful shootings at aid points, what's the bigger takeaway from the sources about aid delivery challenges in Gaza?
What really jumps out is this fundamental, often violent collision between the humanitarian drive, the urgent need to help civilians, and Israel's very strict security measures, especially the naval blockade and their control over how aid gets distributed on land.
And how those measures get framed, it's almost impossible to reconcile, isn't it? Necessary security or illegal obstacle,
Yeah.
humanitarian mission or hate flotilla.
A safe aid zone or slaughterhouse in an active combat zone. These incidents, they're symptoms, really. Symptoms of a much larger, incredibly complex, long-running conflict. They show the huge, sometimes deadly difficulties of trying to do humanitarian work in an active war zone, the ongoing debates, legal and ethical, about the blockade, and the deep historical roots that make every single action, every word, so loaded.
So the picture the sources paint is one where desperate human need crashes against these deeply embedded security concerns, all seen through completely opposing lenses.
Which leads to a really important question for you, the listener, to think about, drawing from the wider implications in these sources. Given the history here, the intense international spotlight, these kinds of incidents, the Masteline, the shootings inevitably attract, and these starkly conflicting stories, how might these specific events actually shape global opinion? And maybe more critically, what real influence could they have on future diplomatic efforts? Efforts trying to find some kind of path toward the resolution in Gaza.
It really does make you consider those wider ripple effects, doesn't it? Way beyond just the immediate facts of what happened. It's a situation where understanding the different perspectives, as hard as they are to square, is just crucial to even begin grappling with the full weight of it all.